Whenever we talk about web development with Python, it's almost inevitable to talk about Django, which is a very popular Python based web framework. Django is a full stack web framework. It has two parts to it. Full stack means Django can be used to build both front end, which is a user facing end of the web application, and back end, which retrieves the data and serves the responses to the users of a web application. So it can be used to build both front end and back end. Web framework is something which helps us, which comes with lots of functionalities and APIs, which helps us to solve problems related to web applications easily. And Django is one of the framework which is battery included. That means that it has lots of functionalities inbuilt to it, which helps us to solve many common problems while we are trying to solve problems related to web applications. Whenever we want to learn Django, we talk about something called as MBT, which is the architecture which Django follows usually, where model is the data layer, view is the layer which is actually equivalent to C, that is controller in MVC architecture, which is where the business logic is written, and template is the presentation layer, like where we return the things that the user can see. But today we are not going to be talking about how to learn Django in this sense. We are going to see how Django fits into the web ecosystem and building websites, so that we have great bigger overview, big picture, like how Django and any Python based web framework for that matter fit into the web applications, web development in general. So for that, let's recap and see how, let's see first like how the websites work usually. So whenever we talk about websites or web applications, it's basically when a user goes to a browser and they are looking for anything. In websites we are looking for some info always. For example, maybe an image or YouTube video or any kind of stuff. All of these come into under a terminology called as resource when we talk about web development. So when we go to Google and search for something, we get a list of the items which when we click, we get the required info that we were looking for. All of these things are requested via something called as URL, which stands for Uniform Resource Locator. This is a kind of address which is human form, which is human readable form. For example, www.google.com maybe, and when we are typing this, it goes to some another place, and from there we get the information that we were looking for or resource that we were looking for. So how does it work internally? So what happens is that whenever we type a URL and when we click enter, something called as request is sent to some another computer, which is usually called server, and the browser on which we were sitting on is called client in terms of web applications. So computer doesn't understand these URLs because those are www.google.com human readable form. Computers only understand in the form of numbers. And whenever we are looking for anything, what do we do in real world? We look for some location or some address for any person. So if we want to find our friend in any given location, we will ask the address. Similarly, all the machines in the network of networks, that is internet, have their own addresses, and those addresses are something called as IP address. IP address are in the form of numbers. It looks something like this. So if I look at my public IP address, it is this one. So this is the way IP addresses look usually. So IP addresses are something that computer understands. So how do they work? Because we type something called as www.google.com. So usually whenever the URL is typed, the request goes to something called as DNS servers, which stands for domain name servers, and that domain name server actually looks for the IP address of that equivalent to that URL from the nearest servers where the domain name and IP addresses are mapped. From there, the IP address is returned to the client, and using this IP address, it then sends a request, something called as request, that is, it is looking for some kind of information to another piece of computer or computer somewhere else with that same IP address. Once it goes there, it returns the response if that information is present in the server, and if it is not there, it will just return some kind of error. So this is how usually web applications work. But if you look at it, Python was not designed to be something which can serve this purpose. There are few dedicated type of software which are used to serve this kind of information. For example, Apache or Nginx. These are the piece of software which are called server software. These are designed to process the request that is incoming in the server hardware, and then these process the request and return the request. So how are we writing and then how do we build the web applications in Django? It actually works like this. Whenever a client requests some information to the server, it is passed on to the some kind of software which understand the language of the internet, which is HTTP compliant. HTTP is the protocol which enables us to send requests and return the responses. This will take the request and then it will pass on the request to the server software which was written in Django. But there is something called as WSGI in between, which helps us to translate the pass on the information from the web server to the Django. So what happens is that this web server gateway interface is a piece of software which allows us to take the request from the web servers and then it is passed on to Django. So the Python web frameworks like Django or even Flask, these always work in conjunction with something called as WSGI, and also the server applications like Apache maybe, and then the information passed to Django, and from there on the concept of URL dispatcher and model view template take place. So once the information comes to Django, it will do its work, and it will process the request using the view, and then the response is returned. So this is how Django internally works. So this, I hope that this gives us the very broad overview like how Django actually works and how it fits. It also helps us to understand like how Django is actually working. There are many new things happening nowadays, like Django is moving to the asynchronous world called as ASGI. So if we want to learn about those things, this kind of foundation is very important.